Hey coders, welcome to part 4 of this e-commerce series where we are building this website without any frameworks and libraries. We are using PHP for backend, JavaScript for frontend, and the communication between the two is done through Fetch APIs. In the previous tutorial, we managed to bring these featured products and new arrivals from backend and integrated them into the DOM, therefore we are able to see it in the browser. In this tutorial, we need to work on these categories such that when you click on any of these categories, the products related to those categories should appear and rest of the contents of this landing page should disappear except for the header and this footer. So that means this banner should disappear as well as the featured products and new arrivals should disappear as well. And the only product that we should see must belong to the category that we have clicked. The other thing that we need to work on is that each of these menus should not be highlighted in the beginning, and only the category that has been clicked should show this background, the blue background, and the rest should not have any background. So this is another thing that we need to do. And the third thing is that when we click on any of these products, whether the product is a featured product, new arrivals, or one of the categories products, when we click on them, we should be able to see an overlay which covers our whole browser, and within the center of that overlay we should be able to see all the information related to the cart or the product that has been clicked, and from there we can select the quantity as well as add it to the cart. Let me show it in the demo project. So this is the front end of our demo project, and as you can see, none of these menu items are currently highlighted. And when we click on one of these menu items such as this baby, then as you can see, the banner has disappeared as well as new arrival and featured products, and only the products that we can see are related to the baby category, women and accessories. Now when we click on any of these items, we should be able to see this overlay, and within the center we can see this card which contains the information about this product. So the name, the title, this is the description, the price, and how much items are currently left. So if the items are 10 or less than 10 in the stock, we should see this highlighted in red, which says only X number of items are left. And from here we can select and add it to the cart like that. So this is the work that we need to do in today's tutorial. So without wasting any time, let's get started. Let's go to the project that we are working on. Let's open developers tools. Now let's click on, let's say, this boys category, and the moment I clicked on this boy category, I got this message, category clicked. So that means we already have an event listener attached with each of these categories in the very first tutorial. So it has been a while since we worked on that one, so we might have forgotten the function which is acting as an event listener for these categories. So therefore I've opened this developers tools, and as you can see, this message seems to have come from global.js file on line 24. So let's go there, and that will directly take us to the function which is being called when you click these categories. I lost track. Oh, there it is. So this is the one. This is the message that we are getting. It's on line 24, and the function is get category products. That means this is the function that we have to start our coding from. And the first piece of logic that we have to define over there is that when we click on these categories, only that category should be highlighted and the rest of the categories should stay unhighlighted. So let's go to this function and start working on this logic. Let's search for it, get category products. Okay, this is the function. Now as we discussed, the first thing that we need to work on over here is that we have to define the logic which makes the clicked categories stay highlighted and the rest of the categories should not be highlighted. That means they don't show that blue background, which is currently being shown by all of the categories. Now in order to define this logic, first of all we have to get hold of the exact category that has been clicked. Now as you know that this function is acting as an event handler for the click event associated with those categories. That means this function has by default been passed a parameter which we can name anything, but it's usually named event. So if we print that out to figure out what information has been passed through this event, and if we can get hold of the category that has been clicked from this event, then that solves our problems. If not, we have to think of other ways. So let's go back to our project and figure out what information this event object holds. Okay, now let's click on the main category. It says the pointer event. Now this object is pointing to a mouse click event because we clicked on it, so that's why it says pointer event. And it doesn't tell us which category was clicked anywhere. Let's click on some other category. Again we got the pointer event. So that means the event object that has been passed along as the result of this click event is of no use to us. So we have to think of something else. Now, other thing that we know that every function by default has a variable called this associated with all the functions. Because JavaScript is an object-oriented language or object prototype language to be specific, which have some differences, but for the time being we are considering it as simple object-oriented programming language. So since JavaScript is an object-based language, that means every function has a variable called this within each function. So let's click on this. Let's print this and figure out what information this variable contains. Since we don't need this event object, so I'm removing it. Now let's go and click one more time on the categories and see what kind of information this keyword displays for us. Now let's click on women. Now as you can see, first of all we got the message and then we got the actual list item which has been clicked. So the list item which has been clicked is li with the class name women, and the contents of this li is women as well. Now if we want, we can extract this contents part from this list item if we like to, and this will solve our problem of figuring out which category has been clicked. But there is an even better way to get hold of this category name, which is a function called bind, which is by default available with our JavaScript. So what we are going to do is that we are going back up where we are defining this function as an event handler for the click event associated with the list items. So let's go back up, and over here we are attaching this function get category product as an event handler to this event, click event associated with these list items. So what we are going to do is that since we know that we cannot put these parentheses and pass parameters over here because this will turn this function into calling this function. So we were not calling this function over here, we were merely passing the reference to this function to tell this event listener that when this list item is clicked, this is the function that should be called. But if we put these parentheses over here, it will directly call the function right here at this point. And that was not our aim. We didn't want this function to be called straight away. We just wanted this event listener to know when this list item is clicked, this is the function that needs to be called, not called straight away. Only when this particular item is clicked, only then this function should be called. So this is called passing the reference. And since we are passing the reference, we cannot put parentheses with it, and therefore we cannot pass any parameters. So the other solution is to use the bind function. So when we are using bind function with anything, that bind function is going to change the value of this keyword which this function is supposed to naturally have. So this function is supposed to naturally have the whole list item as a this keyword, and now we are telling it to change the value by using this bind function. So the function name dot bind and parentheses, and over here whatever we pass over here, that will act as the value of this keyword inside this function. So what shall we pass over here? Since we know this cat contains the name of the category, we can pass this cat as a parameter to this bind method. This way, let's go back to the function itself. Over here. This way, the value of this variable has been changed from the list item to whatever the value of that cat variable was. And that cat variable contains the name of the category over here. So we are passing this cat which contains the name of the category, and we are binding it to this get category products function. So in order to test this out, let's go back to our demo project. Not the demo one, rather the one we are working on. So now let's click on the girl, and now you can see we have got one string variable with the value girl. Let's click on accessory. So string variable with the value accessory, main, and again string variable with the string object with the value main. So now we have direct access to the category that has been clicked. Now since we have got hold of exact category that has been clicked, so let's comment this out. We don't need this anymore. Let's store it in a local variable. Okay, since this get category products is going to perform different tasks, the first one of them being only highlight the category that has been clicked. So what I'm going to do is that the logic associated with only highlighting the click category in a separate function. So we are going to define a function set active category and pass this cat variable to it. Now let's define this set active category function outside this get category products function, because we will come back and further define the logic over here for the other subtasks that we need to perform within this function. Function set active category, and over here what we are going to do is that we are going to get hold of all the list items, and then we will loop through them and compare the category name with the one that has been passed. And if those two names match, then we will set the background color for that particular list item to blue, and for the rest we will set it to the initial color. So initial color is the default color which is associated with any HTML element by the HTML itself. So in order to get hold of all the list items, let's go back to our browser. Let's inspect one of these list items. So as you can see, these list items are part of UL, which are inside this navigation div. So we are going to get hold of any li which is inside this navigation class. So constant category list document.query selector all. We need to use query selector all because we know we have more than one list item inside that navigation div. So the class name for the navigation div is .navigation, and now we have to target any list item which is inside this navigation div. No matter how deeply nested this list item is, as long as it's inside a div with the class name navigation, we want the reference to that list item. As a result, all the list items which are inside this navigation div will be returned as a collection in this category list. Now we can loop through this category list, and while we are looping through it, we will match the class name for those list items with this name. So if any list item whose class name matches with the name provided in this variable, that list item's background color is going to be set to the blue one, and for the rest we are going to set it to its initial color. And when we set any value to initial, that means the default value which has been assigned by the HTML itself to that particular element. And for the list item, this is going to be transparent. Okay, so let's loop through it. Category list for each, and as we know, this for each takes an error function to which we are going to pass one category value at a time. And inside the body of this arrow function, we are going to define the logic, which is going to be if category.classList contains a class which matches this name. In that case, we have found the category that has been clicked. So now we have to set its background color to the one which we have defined in our CSS as primary color variable. That means we have to get access to that primary color that we have defined in the CSS. So this is the variable that we have defined in our CSS, and it has the name primary color, and it's defined in this root element. Okay, so we need to get hold of that variable in our JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going up. Let's first get hold of the root element which is defined in the CSS. Document.query selector. Now using a method which is defined in the window object, which is by default available in the JavaScript, we are going to access one of its CSS properties. And in this case, the CSS property that we are interested in is the variable named primary color that we have defined inside this root element. So in window.getComputed_style is the method. Now this getComputed_style text element whose particular CSS property we are interested in. So since we are interested in one of the CSS properties which are defined inside this root element, so we have to pass the reference to this root element, which is the root variable that we just defined. Now we have to call another method. In fact, we are chaining this method to this one, and the method is getPropertyValue, and within this getPropertyValue we can ask for any of the properties which are defined inside this root element. And since we are interested in the variable named primary color, so now our primary color variable, this one, holds the value which we have defined in this variable in our CSS file. Now before we further define the logic in our for each loop, let's console log this message just to be certain that we have actually got hold of the primary color value, because our logic is going to depend on the value defined over here, and if we haven't successfully got the exact value from our CSS variable, then the rest of the logic isn't going to work either. Okay, let's click on this anyone. Okay, now these are the RGB values for this background color, and just to be certain that that is the case, then no matter which list item I shall click, I should get the same RGB values. So as you can see, the number is increasing but the value is same. Okay, so now we have actually access to the RGB values of the primary color which we have defined in the CSS file. Now let's go back in our for each loop. So over here we were saying if category.classList contains this name, that means that is the category that has been clicked. So in that case we want to change its color. So background color, so category style dot background color equals primary color, else set this color to the initial value, that means the default value or default color assigned by the CSS itself. Okay, now let's go and test it out. Now let's click somewhere, let's click on the boy. Now as you can see, only boy is highlighted and rest of the colors have been removed. Women, it's working. However, if you refresh this page, at the start all of these categories are highlighted. That is because in our CSS file we have defined the background color for all of these list items. So until we click on any of these categories, our function set active category is not executed, and hence we are able to see the background with all of these categories. So we need to remove that background color from our CSS file. So let's inspect. So in the navigation UL and LI we have defined this background color. We remove it. Now you can see we don't see any color. So we have to go back to our CSS file and look for this particular item and then remove this background color. So Control F, dot navigation UL and LI. So this is the one we are interested in, and let's comment this out. Let's go refresh. Now as you can see, initially we don't see any of the category that is highlighted. Now let's click somewhere, girl. Now we can see only this particular category is highlighted because that's the one we have clicked. Main and accessory. Now this part is working. Now we can move on to the second part, which is when the category is clicked, then our landing page should also change, and we should only be able to see the product over here which belong to that particular category. So we have to remove this banner, featured products, as well as new arrivals. So let's start working on that. Let's go back to the JavaScript file and let's go up to our get category products function. Now we are done with setting the active category only. Now next thing that we need to do is that we have to make a fetch request to our backend and ask for products that belong to this category that has been clicked. So fetch call localhost 8081 user backend. Now we have to define the endpoint, that is product.php. Now this is the name of the file, but we have to attach a query string to this one with one key value pair, category, and the value is going to be the cat, this category name. And since we have used string interpolation, so we have to put it inside backticks. This fetch request is going to be a get request as well. So the only other parameter that we need to provide is the callback function. So response category products. So this is the name. Response category products is the name that we are going to use as a callback function. And now let's go and define this category function. So now we have two options. Either we can define it as an independent function outside this get category products. In that case, we have to bind this get to this function so that we have the access to the category as well. Or we can define it inside the get category products as an inner function, in which case we don't have to bind anything with this function. So since so far we have been defining the function that handles the fetch response as an inner function in which the fetch request is made, so we are going to continue with the same logic, and we are defining this function inside this get category function as its inner function. Function response category products, and it will receive the data. So before we define any further logic, for the time being, let's just console log whatever we have received from the backend, and then we will figure out how to integrate this data in the DOM and hence as a result in the browser. But for the time being, this is enough. Now let's go and define this PHP file for the backend so that this request is handled by this PHP file. So we have to go to the backend folder and let's define this file, product.php. Now let's go to any of the other PHP files. I've opened this new arrivals.php, copy everything and paste it in product.php file. Now start changing this file. So let's start from this if request method is get, and now since we are expecting some query string, so we need to make sure that there is some query string attached with this, because in that query string we expect the category name whose data we are supposed to get from the database and return it as a response. So we have to make sure that there is this query string attached. So to check if there is query string attached with the name category, we have to use $_get. The name is category. This is the name that we gave when we were making this request in the front end. But we have to pass this as a parameter to another function, is set. So we have to make sure that within this get global array there is an index with the name category. If there is such index in this array, that means the request that we have received contains a query string with the name category and its associated value. So if that is the case, we can continue further. Now over here, let's change the select statement. Select everything from product where status equals 1. So we don't need this part because we want all the products that belong to this particular category. And over here we have to say where category ID equals, and over here we have to provide the category ID which matches with the category that we have received as a query string. Because in our products table, as you can see, we have the product IDs. We have products ID, then category ID, products name, description, price, image, status, and edit on columns. But we don't have any category name. However, from our front end, we have received category name, not category ID. So we have to make sure that from the category, we somehow get access to this category ID that we will place over here. So now we are in this dilemma that we have only category name and not category ID. We do not know the ID of that particular category. However, our products table demands category ID matching the category. So what we are going to do is that over here we are going to use subquery. And subquery is simply a SQL statement whose value, whatever is returned, is used as a value to one of the columns in another query. So this is our main SQL query, and inside this we are using a subquery, and whatever we define over here, the value that is going to be returned from that subquery is going to be used as the category ID columns value. So now over here we have to define the subquery, and the subquery is going to be select. Let's go and check the category table first so that we know the column names. So the column name is name and this is the ID. So select ID from category table where name equals. Now we are going to place a question mark over here. The reason for placing a question mark over here is that now we are going to use prepared statements, and the justification for using prepared statement is that over here basically we are supposed to write this thing. So whatever value is available in this particular index, get that value and use it as the value for this column name. But since we have received this value from our user, and at the back end a user cannot be trusted, because if the user is malicious, then we are opening ourselves to SQL injection attacks, and in order to avoid SQL injection attacks we have to use prepared statements. So the first step towards using a prepared statement is wherever we are supposed to use data from the user, we are putting question marks in its place. Then so let's discuss one more time this subquery. So this whole thing, this select ID from category where name equals whatever is the category name. So if that category name matches in the database, the ID associated with that category name is going to be returned, and which will become the value for this category ID column. So suppose the value which has been returned is 5. In that case, this will become select everything from product where status equals 1 and category ID equals 5. Okay, so this is first part towards using prepared statement. Now next thing that we need to do is that let's create another variable, prepared statement, and now we have to use our connection variable, and we have to use one of its methods, that is a method defined in this connection variable which is called prepare, and to this prepare method we have to pass this statement. So this is step number 2. Now from now on we have to use this variable, and in step number 3 we have to bind the value with the question mark that we have put in the step 1. So to do that we are going to use prep underscore statement and bind. Now this bind method always takes one more parameter than the number of question marks that we have put in step 1. So in step 1, that is in this statement, we put one question mark. So over here we have to bind a value for that question mark. Now since there is one question mark, so this bind is going to take two parameters. The first one is going to define what is the data type of the value that we are going to bind with that question mark. Since we are giving categories name, so that means it's a type string, so we are going to put S over here. And in the next one, we are providing the actual value that is going to be binded with that question mark. So over here we have to define the value. Now we can do this since we know the value is going to come from the get super global variable, which is an array whose index is category. But the thing is since this is an array, so that means this is a reference value, and this bind method does not take a reference value. It has to have some kind of scalar value. So what we are going to do is that we are going to cut it, and let's define a variable. Let's make it category. Now this category contains the value which is provided through this super global variable. Now we can provide this category variable as a second parameter to our bind method. So this is step number 3. Why is this wiggly line over here? Oh, it's actually bind parent, not just bind. Okay. Now we have done all the preparations and we are ready to actually execute this prepared statement. So step 4 is to execute this statement. So prep statement. Now we have to call a method on it which is called execute. Okay, so now our statement has been executed. Now step 5 is to get the data from this statement. So over here we are going to say if result equals, let's remove this, and prep statement, and call a method called get result. So if any result has been received from this prepared statement, that is going to be returned and stored in this result. And if this result contains a value, we will go inside this if statement where we are creating an empty array, and then we are going to get one row at a time from this result set as an associative array and storing it in this row array. Then we are pushing this row array into this empty array that we created over here. And when we are done with it, we are going to return this response back to our front end. For the name that we are going to give this index is products. And over here, before exiting the function, we should actually make sure to close this prepared statement. So this one, prep underscore statement, close. Okay, I think everything is set. Now let's go and test it out in the browser. Okay, now let's open console, the developer's tools. Let's click somewhere, curve, and we got an error. Or if you notice, it has attached HTTP localhost 8081 twice. So, okay, the thing is this, over here we only have to provide this part because the rest is already defined in this fetch call. So product.php category equals this one. So let's go to this fetch call. So this part is already provided through this URL function, URL constant, and we were again defining it. So that's why it was being attached twice. As a result, a different URL. So hopefully this has sorted out the problem. One more time refresh just to be certain, even though our live server already refreshes it. Another kind of error, product.php category internal server error. So it seems that this file does not exist at the backend. Undefined variable prep statement. Okay, there's an extra statement. So it was an internal error since the PHP couldn't figure out how to respond on line 20. Okay, let's click boy. Now we got 4 products which belong to boys category. So let's check, do we only have 4 boys products? Yeah, boy 1 to boy 4. Let's click men's category. We have 7 products. Okay, men 1 to men 7. So that means we are getting proper data depending on which category has been clicked. So now all we need to do is that we have to integrate that data in the DOM so that we can see it in the browser. So let's go and work on that part. So this is the get category products, which is an event handler when any category is clicked. Once this function starts executing, it sets the category that has been clicked as an active category, then it makes a fetch call, and this is the data that we have received. Now over here we have to define the logic which is going to integrate this data in the DOM and hence in the browser. Okay, so now we have to display this data in our landing page. We have to remove the banner, featured products, as well as the new arrivals from there, and just display this data. So just to refresh how is our index.html defined, let's go there. So this is main element in which we have a section named banner. Then we have another section named featured products, and then we have another section named new arrivals. So what we are going to do is that we are going to get a reference to this main, then we will set its contents to empty quotations. This is going to delete all these 3 sections which are its children, and then from that empty slate we are going to integrate the content into this main element. So let's comment this out, console.log message if data contains a property named products, because this is the name that we have given to our associative array with which we have sent back the response. So if we have products in the response, in that case we need to get a reference. So let's get a reference at the top to the main in our HTML element, document query selector. Now this is an HTML element, so simply MAIN, no dot at the start or hash, because this is HTML element. Okay, now let's set main dot inner HTML equals empty quotations, and now we don't need to do anything except for calling a function called populate catalog. The first one is going to be the actual products that we want to populate in the catalog, so data.products is the first parameter, and second one is going to be the parent or the encompassing element in which we want to populate all these products. So in our case it's going to be main. So this main is the catalog and these products are going to be its contents. And I think we are done with everything because we had already done the hard work in our previous parts of this series. So let's go and test it out in the browser. Just to be certain, refresh. Otherwise we don't need to. Let's click on women and we got all the women related products. Yahoo! Let's click on girls. Good. Accessories. Thread. Now let's click on the main and we again got featured products, new arrivals as well as the banner. So we are done with this part as well. Now what we need to work on next is that when we click on any of these products, we should be able to see this, let's say, this overlay. So currently when we click, nothing happens. So this is our next task that we have to work on. So in order to initiate this next task, when we click on these products, something should happen. That means we have to attach an event listener with each of these cards. So currently, as you can see, when you click, nothing happens. So what we are going to do is that we have to decide, do we want to attach event listener with this image only, or if we click on this part down below, that means if we click anywhere in the card, we should be able to see that overlay which contains all the information related to that product. So I'm going to go with this card such that when I click anywhere, I should be able to see that overlay. So that means let's inspect it. And as you can see, this is inside this card div. So that means we have to go to our global.js where we are defining this card element or card div and attach an event listener with that one. So let's look for the card over here. This is card.className equals card. So this is where we can define the event listener. So card.add event listener. Click. And since this is going to display all the data related to the product, so the name that we shall give is get product details. So let's go and define this function with one console.message such that we are at least able to see that it's working. Let's refresh and click somewhere. Let's go to the console. And as you can see, message says product clicked. Let's click somewhere else. So 2 product click messages, 3 product click messages. Let's click on women category and click somewhere, and again we get the same message. So that means we are on the right track. Next, we have to decide what kind of data do we want to display in the overlay that is going to appear once we click on it. So let's go to the demo project, and from there we can see we are going to get the title, description, price, and the stock, a drop-down list from which you can select the quantity that you want to buy for this product. So where shall we get this data? Let's go back, and this is the function that is going to be executed once we click on the card. So that means this is an event handler. So let's go back where we are making this function, an event handler. So search for it, Control F, let's get product details. Okay, and let's go up. Okay, so this is here we are attaching this function as an event listener to this click, when this card is clicked. So over here we can bind the data that we want this function to have access to once it's called. So we are going to use bind, and we are going to bind this whole product to this bind method. So this way any information which is in this product is going to be made available to this get products details through this keyword or this variable. Now let's go back to this function, and first of all let's print the information that we have received through the binding. Okay, now let's click somewhere. Okay, so this is all the information that we have got. So the product ID is 17, category ID 2. So this is basically all the information from the product table. So added on category ID, description, ID, image URL, name, price, and status. Now the only thing that is missing is how much stock for this particular product is available in the warehouse. So for that, what we will do is that we will make a fetch request to the database and request it to return the stock associated with this particular product. So before we think of how to integrate the data that we have available through this keyword, let's make a fetch request to the backend and ask for the stock. And then we will think of how can we integrate it with the DOM, and then finally its styling. So let's make a fetch call. So fetch call, and this time the URL endpoint that we are going to hit is going to be named inventory.php, and we have to provide the particular ID whose associated stock we are interested in. So let's make it prod ID, or just simply ID equals, and the ID is going to come from this keywords category ID, category underscore ID. So therefore, first of all, let's put it within backticks. So Control X. Let's remove this with backticks, text back, and now this category underscore ID. Then we have to define the callback function, which is going to get the data returned through this fetch request. So response inventory. Now let's define this function as an inner function to this get product details function. The reason for making it an inner function is that so response inventory, and it will receive the data from the fetch call. Okay, now so for the time being, what we are going to do is that we are just going to print the data that we are going to receive from the backend. It's going to be data. Now we have to define this inventory.php file as well. So let's go to the backend. Let's define a file, inventory.php. Now since this inventory.php is also going to receive some query string, so that means we will be using prepared statement there as well. So I'm going to copy everything which is available in the product.php and pasting it into inventory.php file. Now before we modify our inventory.php file, I need to show you one table in the database that I have already created, which is this inventory table. So let's go there and look at it. So it contains 3 columns: ID column, product ID, and stock. So this product ID is a foreign key which has been linked with primary key of this product table, this one. So this way, this particular product main one has an ID 1, so that means we must have a row in the inventory table with the product ID 1, and this row shows that this particular product has stock 56 available in it. Likewise, this particular row with the product ID 7 suggests that currently we don't have that particular item in the stock. So let's go to our product table and see which product has this ID. So that means that product is out of stock at the moment. So let's go to the product table and ID 7. This one, main 4, is currently out of stock. So since it's a very simple table and we have already created 3 tables in which we have also seen how to link one table with another through primary key and foreign key relationship. So it's a very simple table, therefore I don't think you will have any trouble creating this table. The only thing is that for this stock you have to put some random values. So for some you have to make sure it has a stock greater than 10, because the logic that we are going to define is as such that if the stock is greater than 10, we will only display the message in stock, and if the stock is 10 or less than 10, we will show only that particular number of items available in stock. Like for this 6, we will display the message only 6 left in stock, and for 0 we will display the message out of stock. So you make sure you have these different varied values so that you can see all the flavors in your website. Okay, now let's go back to our inventory.php file and update that file according to our needs. So again, the request method is get, and over here we have to check if this request contains a query string with the key named ID. So if that is the case, that means we have already received an ID for the product and we can continue further. Now over here we have to say select just stock from inventory where, let's remove the rest, where product ID equals question mark. Then step 1, prepare statement, and we have to pass this one. This is going to remain the same. Now over here we have to change the variable from category to ID and change it back to ID. Then bind it, and now since we have this category ID is a numeric value and it's basically an integer value, so ID. Now over here, since we know that we are going to get only one row for each product ID, because let me show you the structure of the inventory. Now if you look at this product ID, I have set it to unique, so that means we can't have duplicate rows with the same product ID. So this means when we are defining the logic over here, we can be certain that at most the result that we are going to get over here is going to contain just one row at a time. So we don't need to use this while loop. So what we can do is that we have to comment this out, and when we are pushing this data into the array, let's remove it and take this thing, copy and paste it over here. So what this is going to do is that it's going to get the first row, which is the only row in this case, and convert it into an associative array and storing it into this empty array. The rest is same. Now we can simplify this even further, because since we know that in our select statement we are only requesting for one column, that is this stock. So what we can do is that we can get rid of this array as well, and let's comment this out as well, and over here let's make this stock, and for this value copy, paste, and since we already know that once this first row has been turned into an associative array, that array is going to contain one index with a key named stock. So I'm extracting that stock key, and its value is going to be assigned to this stock value. I hope I haven't done any mistake. Let's go and check it in the browser if that is the case. Just to be certain, refresh. Now click. Response inventory is not defined. So let's go to global.js. Okay, res response inventory. Let's click. Internal server error. Okay. Actually over here we forgot to put assignment operator in our SQL statement. So hopefully everything is set now. Okay, now let's test it out. Why does it show stock null? This one shows stock 6. Again null. Oh, I see. We are not supposed to send category ID, rather we are supposed to send product IDs, which was just ID, I think. So let's click somewhere. Okay. Now the ID of this product is 21 and its stock is 0. So let's check in our table. So in inventory with the ID, product ID, what was the product ID? 21. So for the product ID 21, we should have stock 0. Okay, product ID 21, stock 0. So when we are sending the category ID, then probably that category ID didn't exist in the product ID's values. So that's why we were receiving null. Okay, so now we have all the data and associated stock. Now we are ready to stitch it in the DOM and display it in the browser. So let's start working on that. First thing, let's comment out these console log messages. Okay, now we need to define two divs over here. The first div is going to act as a see-through overlay, and the second div is going to contain the card in the middle, which is going to contain all the product related data. So first, let's define that overlay div. So const overlay equals document or create element div, and let's give it the class name equals, let's give the class name overlay as well. Okay, now let's go to our CSS file and define the styling for this overlay. Now in the CSS file, since the logic that we are defining is going to go in the main element of HTML, so let's go where we were defining all the classes related to main section, main element. This is header section. Let's go down. Okay, the main section starts over here. So let's go to the very end before the footer starts. So this is where the footer starts. So over here, let's work on overlay. Since the class name that we gave is overlay as well. Now we want this overlay to cover the whole area of the browser. So therefore we have to first of all set position to fixed. Then top 0 to start from the very top left corner. So therefore left also 0, and we want it to stretch out, therefore right 0 as well. Now we have to define the total width and height. So these three things define the starting coordinates. Now let's define the width to be 100% of viewing width, height also 100% of viewing height, background color a shade of black. Now we want it to be semi-transparent, so let's set the opacity to 0.8. Now since we have already given z index to our header, so that means no matter how many elements we define, the header is going to stay at the top. So we want this time this overlay to sit even on top of header. So that means we have to define the z index for it, and we have to give it a value higher than the one that we have given to the header element. So let's make it 200. We have given value 100 to our header, so this is 200. Let's refresh and test it out. Nothing happens. Oh, that's because we have defined this overlay, but we haven't yet attached it to our DOM element. So let's get a reference to main. And let's append it as a last child to this main. So main dot append child overlay. So this time we are not removing the contents of main that are already there, rather we are appending it as a last child. Let's refresh and click now. Let's close it. So now we are able to see this overlay, and as you can see, it's covering the whole area of the browser. Okay, so this part is working fine. Now let's go refresh it, because we haven't yet defined the event listener to remove this overlay. So therefore we have to refresh it if you want to remove that overlay until we define that event listener. So now let's define the second div, which is going to be the model inside that overlay. So let me copy these three lines and paste it, and change the name to model. Give it the class name model as well, and append it model to the main. But let's go and define the CSS style before we have a peek at it in the browser. So model, we are going to have the similar styles that we have defined for the overlays. So I'm going to copy it and paste it. Now we don't want this to be opaque, so I have removed this opacity property. Background color, we want it to be white, and Z index, I am giving it higher value than 200, because I want this model element to sit even on top of the overlay, and I don't want it to occupy the whole space, the whole area. So for the left is top is going to be 0. For the left, I want it to push it 25% towards the left. In fact, let's make 25% down as well. Probably we don't need this. For the width, let's make it 50%, and for the height, let's also make it 50%. Now let's go and have a look. Click somewhere. Okay, so where is the overlay gone? Oh, let's change this to model. Click somewhere. Now that's better. Let's give it smooth edges. So border radius, let's give it 7 pixels. That's better. Now what we need to do is that we have to integrate all the product related data within this model card, and then attach an event listener with this overlay, such that when we click anywhere outside this model, this whole overlay as well as model should disappear. So which one shall we do first? Shall we define that event listener first? Okay, then let's go. Global.js, and over here we were defining the overlays. So overlay dot add event listener. Click, and the name that we are going to assign to this callback function is remove overlay. Okay, so let's go out and define this function, remove overlay. And since it's a separate function, so let's create a reference to the main element. So const main document dot query selector main. Let's also get references to the overlay and model divs as well. So now, even though we know that when this function is called, it's going to contain, the main element is going to contain an overlay element as well as a model element. But before we remove it, we still are going to check if overlay, that means if this particular div exists, only then remove it. Overlay dot remove. Likewise, PHP test. If model element exists, then remove it. Refresh, click, click. It's working good. So now our event listener is also defined. Now let's start working on how to bring all the data related to the product and display it in this model div. So let's go to the demo project and have a peek at its contents. So basically the contents in this div are divided into two parts. The first one represents the image and second one represents all the description related to the product. And inside this description div, we are going to have one div or one span for this title, another one for accessories, third one for the price, and the fifth one is going to represent the stock, sixth one is a drop down list, and the seventh one is add to cart button. So let's start working on it. So let's go up where we were working. So within this response inventory function we were working, and so far we have created two divs, overlay and model, and we have appended them to the main div. Now we have to create the rest of the elements and keep appending them to this model div. So first of all, let's append the image to this model. So therefore, let's create an image element. Document create element image. Image.source equals, so use metrics and HTTP. Now our images are directly inside the root folder. As you can see, they are directly inside the root folder. So just the domain name, which is localhost 8081, and for the rest, this dot image. Now append this image element to the model element. So model dot append child image. Now let's create second div. Model description, document dot create element. Let's close it. Let's give it a class name. Model description dot class name model description. Now within this div we are going to create rest of the contents. The first one was title, and let's create title, create element div, title.text contents equals this dot name. We have to append this title to model description. So model description dot append child title. Now create description, create element div, description dot text contents equals this dot description, model description dot append child description. Now we haven't appended this model description to the model, so let's append it. So model dot append child model description. Okay, let's go down. Now create a div for the price. So const price is document dot create element div, price dot text contents equals this dot price. Now append it to the model description div. We need to append the $sign with this as well. So backtick the $sign. The first $sign is for the symbol dollar, and the second $sign is part of model string interpolation. Now paste it over here. Okay, we are done with the price. Now for the stock, since the stock is in data.stock variable, so let's create a variable at the top. Const stock equals equals data.stock. Now since the data that we have received it as a string, so to be on the safe side, we are going to append it with plus sign. So this is going to convert data.stock into a numeric value. Okay, never mind. Parentheses got removed themselves. Okay. Now let's create a div for the stock. So stock div document.create element div. Now for the stock, we are going to have 3 different values depending on the contents of the stock. So if the value is greater than 10, we will display the message in stock in green color. If it's 10 or less than 10 but greater than 0, then we will display the message only X left in stock, X being the number of items currently in the stock. And if it's 0, then we will display the message out of stock. So therefore we are going to use switch statement for the contents of this div. So currently I'm keeping this empty for a reason, and I'm going to go into the cases of the switch statement. So case stock greater than 10, in that case stock div.text contents equals in stock, and we want it to be in green color. So stock div.style.color is green. Then break. Let's define second case. Stock less than or equal to 10, stock greater than 0, and less than or equal to 10. In that case, stock div.text contents equals put backtick only stock left. Then stock div.style.color equals, what color shall we put? Yellow for warning, or maybe green. Then break. Green because we still have some stock available to buy, and yellow might not be that much visible. Now case stock equals 0. In that case, let's copy this, paste, and make it out of stock and make the color red. Now make default, let's paste it. What shall we put over here? Not sure. And break. Okay, now let's go back and decide what shall we put over here. As you can see, we have used stock constant with all the cases. So the first case that might come to our mind is we have to use stock over here. But the thing is that this is a numeric value, whereas all our cases are Boolean values. So if we do that, we will never be able to display any of these cases. We will always end up with the default one. So we have to think of putting something over here which returns a Boolean value as well. So we are going to put true over here, so it will always be true, and then it will try to look for the case whose statement also values to true. So whatever is the stock, based on that stock, only that case will return true, and as a result we will get the message which is part of that case. Okay, now let's append this stock div to model description as well. So outside this switch statement, model description dot append child stock div. Now we have to define the drop down list from which the user can select the quantity. So const select equals document create element select. Now next we have to define its drop down list. So over here we have to make the decision that how many items should be selected at a time by a customer. So let's make this decision that at most a customer can put 10 items in a cart. So that means we have to define 10 option elements for this select statement. But wait a second, what happens when the stock is less than 10? Let's suppose if the stock is 3, then should the user still be given the choice to select more than 3 items, even though we are clearly saying that only 3 items are left? So in that case, clearly we should only be able to see just 3 elements to choose from. Likewise, when the product is out of stock, we should not be able to select any item from this list. So that means in that case, the drop-down list should be disabled and we should not be able to select anything at all. So how shall we tackle these different scenarios? So let's start off with a scenario when we have run out of stock. So if stock equals 0, in that case, select.disabled equals true. Else, let's create counter variable, and if stock is greater than 10, in that case return 10 is the value for this counter, else whatever is in the stock, that value is going to be the value of this counter. Now we are going to create a loop which is going to run this many number of times. So for let I equals 1, I less than or equal to counter I plus plus. So we are starting our loop with value 1 because obviously we don't want to select 0 items. Now within the body of this for loop, let's create an option, const option, document create element option, option dot value equals option, and option dot text also equals option. We have to append this option to the select element. Select dot append child option. Now outside this, which represents these yellow brackets, then outside this if statement, which is being represented through these blue curly brackets, we are going to append the select over model div. So model description dot append child select element. The last item to insert in this model description div is the add to cart button. So let's create it, const add to cart document dot create element button. Let's give it class, we might need it. Add to cart dot text equals add to cart. Now append this button to model description div as well. Model description dot append child add to cart. Now let's go and have a look in the browser. Since we haven't yet defined any styling, so it's going to look ugly. Click OK. We have got so many problems. We can't see any image. Price is undefined, out of stock. Let's go up and start with the image. Create element image, image.source. Let's console log image.source. F12. Okay, this is undefined. I wonder why. Oh, I see. So this keyword is only for the top level function, get product details, because this inner function has its own div. So let's bind it to the inner function as well. Click. Now we can see the image. Good. Okay, let's define the dimensions for this image so that we can see the rest of the details. So this image is, where is it? So we are defining this div inside this model description div. Have we given the class name to our model description div? Yes, model hyphen description. So let's go to CSS file. Now let's define some more properties for this model div. Since we know that in this model div we have two main components, one is image and other is a div which contains all the description. So we are going to set its display property to grid, then grid template columns for image 1fr, for the description 2fr, and let's give some padding all around. So top bottom 10 pixels, left and right 20 pixels. Okay. Now let's define model image. So the image that is inside this model div. Let's define next height for this image. Now since we know that this model div itself has a height of 50% of viewing height, so for the image we are going to set 47% of viewing height. Okay, that's better. Now we have this title, we should capitalize this one as well, then the description, then price, and in stock. Over here there is still something wrong, so let's go to our options. And it's maybe text content. Okay. So this should not be option itself, it should be the I variable, the loop. And even over here, we have to put I over here. Okay, good. So we can only see 7. This one out of stock, so now it's not visible. But what is this tiny blob for? Is this our button? Yeah. Okay, let's go down where we were defining our button. So text content as well. Yes, that's better. Now we have to define the styling for these elements. So let's go to the CSS file. And over here, let's start with model description div. Let's say it's display property flex direction column, justify content center, align items, flex start. So we want it to be very close to the image. But let's give it some padding. So padding left so that there is some space between the image and the contents of the model description div. Let's make it 1.5 frame. Okay, that's better. Now some common styling for each of the children of this model description div. So since this is going to be applied to all the children, therefore asterisk. Margin bottom, let's make it 25 pixels. Border bottom, solid 1 pixel, and the color is going to be primary color. Width should be 100% of its parent. Heading 5 pixels top bottom and 0 left and right. That's better. Now for this select, we have to remove rest of the border except for the border bottom, and for the edge card button we are going to give it primary color. So let's work on it. So model description div, and a child field which is of type select in this div. First of all, remove border completely, but then we want to have border bottom, so copy and paste. That's better. Now the button inside the model description, but since we have given it a class name, so add to cart was the class name that we gave. Yeah, add to cart. Background color, primary color, border solid 1 pixel, and again color is the same primary color. Heading, let's give it 5 pixels top bottom and 10 pixels left and right. Cursor is pointer. Five pixels, 5 pixels, 5 pixels, and color make it light gray. Let's give it smooth edges as well. Let's increase the top and bottom heading as well. Border radius 5 pixels. That's better. Let's increase the size of this text as well. Font size large. Good. Okay. Now we want to make this title bold as well. So this is the first child in model description div. Model description, first child. Font weight, let's make it 700. So we are done with the styling as well. Now, even though we have achieved our today's goal, but before we go, there is one not exactly a problem but kind of a nuisance that we need to handle. That is, our global.js file has become way too large, and now it's very hard to find when we are searching for something. So it's better if we can somehow reorganize it. So let's go to our global.js file and take a look so that we can figure out how can we reorganize our code into separate files. So as you can see, we are attaching 4 event listeners to our document. One is going to request for the category, second one request banner, third request featured, and fourth request new arrivals. So what we can do is that we shall keep these 4 lines of code where we are defining event listeners into this file, but for the functions themselves, we are going to define separate files. So let's go to our front end, and over here create a file named, for the category that we display as menu.js, and let's look for this function. Where have you defined it? It's over here. So this function starts over here on this yellow curly brackets. Let's look for the closing curly bracket over here. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy this whole function, copy and comment this out in this global.js file, and let's go to menu.js file, paste it over here, save. Then in our index.html file, let's go down, and after this global.js file, let's attach another script, menu.js. Now let's go back to global.js and let's look for any event listener that we have defined within this function. So we have defined this event listener, which is get category products. So let's find this function and also take this function to the menu function, to the menu file as well. So Control F. This is where it's defined. Let's remove this one first. And console.log data as well. Okay. Now as you can see, this get category products function also calls another function set active category. So that means we also have to take this function to our menu.js file as well. So this is starting bracket. Let's look for its closing bracket. So this is closing bracket, but then this set active category starts and this is where it ends. So copy set active category and then get category products function. Copy and over here comment it out. Okay, now let's take it to menu.js file. Paste it over here. Let's go to the browser. Refresh. Click menu. It's working. Okay, this is working as well. Good. Let's go to global.js. Now the second one is request banner. So let's create banner.js file in the front end. Banner.js. Let's go to global.js and look for the definition of this function. Control F. Okay, so this is where this function is defined. This is starting bracket and this is ending bracket, but it's calling a function called call carousel, so we have to do that one as well. But let's for the time being copy this one. So copy, comment this out, paste it over here in banner.js, and let's append this banner.js to our index.html file as well. Source banner.js. So this banner.js has no event listener. However, it's calling this call carousel function. So let's go to global.js file and bring that function as well. Copy, comment it out, save, go to banner and paste it over here. Call carousel, okay. Now something has gone wrong, which is request categories is not defined. So it says this function request categories is not defined. But why was it working a while ago? Maybe I hadn't saved it. Okay, I think I know the problem. Let's go to index.html file. Okay, since request categories function itself is defined in this menu.js file, so we have to make sure that this file gets loaded at the very end as the last JavaScript file. So therefore I'm going to put the keyword defer. This way this global.js will be the last file to be loaded and executed. And because in this global.js file we are defining event listener and passing the reference of the functions to that event listeners. So if this file is loaded before these ones, this will complain that the callback function that you are passing as a reference has not been defined. So we have to make sure that these files get loaded first, and only then we should load this file. Let's go in the browser and see if that trick has worked. It definitely has. Okay. So now let's go to global.js and let's work on the request featured function. But first let's create a file named feature.js. Now let's look for this function request featured. Control F. Let's see where does it end. Okay. Copy, comment, and paste it in the featured. And let's see if it defines any event listeners or anything. No. Okay, let's add this file as a to our index.html, feature.js. Let's do the same for new arrivals. Script source new arrivals.js. Let's go to global.js, and this is the function new arrivals. Control F. Let's go to the next one. New arrivals. Have I moved new arrivals to featured one? Control F. Okay, we need to move this to request featured and new arrivals to new arrivals. Okay, so let's copy this, copy, comment out, save. Let's go to featured and paste it over here, and let's go to the top and let's remove this function. Control X, because this is supposed to go in the new arrivals file. Okay, we are still able to see the featured as well as new arrivals products, so everything is working fine. Let's go to global.js. Now let's remove the commented part so that we can see what further reorganization we can still apply. We are still able to see everything. Okay, now let's go to global.js. So we have this populate catalog function in the global.js, and I think this is the right place for it because this populate catalog is being called by new arrivals.js file, feature.js file, as well as category products menu.js file as well. So it's there, it's going to stay there. Then over here we are defining the facade for fetch request. Again, this is the right place for it because this is being used by rest of these files. So it's a global thing. Get product details. This should also stay there because this function is also being called by new arrivals, featured products, as well as the category ones. So this is the right place for it as well. Remove overlay. So this should also stay over here. Okay. So now our code is better organized, and hopefully now as you progress further along, we won't have as much difficulty understanding the code as we would have if we had all the code in one place. We still need to apply some refactoring to our backend code as well, but let's leave that for some other time. And let's end this tutorial over here. So I hope you learned something and you really liked it. And if you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. Thank you so much.